I solemnly swear that I will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Good morning, everybody. Ron here from The Truth About Addiction. Today we have a very special guest, Andrew Carpenter. Andrew is quite well known as the man most hated by sex offenders, which I love that title. Welcome, Andrew. Thank you for coming on The Truth About Addiction, mate.
Thanks for having me and shining a light on this very important topic.
I heard so much about you from Russell Manser, who is no longer with us, and he used to always talk about my mate Andrew in Adelaide. He's doing this, he's doing that. He's fighting the good fight. And to me, it was important that we had people who weren't street people shining a light, because no one listens to the ex-crim. You deserved it. You were in jail. You shouldn't have committed the crime. You're not a victim. You are a victim, but the system was telling you you're not a victim. It's your own fault. You put yourself in that situation. And to have people come on side, and today we've started this incredible movement, and I believe it is a movement. I believe that we are getting somewhere, even though it's slow because of the red tape and the bureaucracy. And I believe you'll be able to inform us, myself and the viewers, better than I can. There's a lot of fear based around bringing this stuff to light, because a lot of people are involved who don't want to be publicly named and shamed,
Yeah, I mean, I always say that my wife is kind of the problem with these sorts of things, because we've got young children, and whenever I'm on TV about anything or it's discussed, she's like, I don't want to hear about it. I said, you've got young children. This is something you need to know. 20 years ago, no one spoke about mental health. 10 years ago, no one spoke about suicide. 5 years ago, no one spoke about domestic violence. And it's when you start having uncomfortable conversations is when things change. Like, you talk about how my Instagram page gets flooded with all these comments all the time about, if someone's in a juvenile detention center and is sexually abused, the punishment fits the crime. Absolutely not. Like, a child cannot consent to any form of sexual abuse. These centers were rife for it. It was known about it, but people were scared as being young. I'm a guard, I'm a police officer, I'm a social worker. No one's going to believe you. You're in prison for stealing a chocolate bar. And it's the tide's changing, where you've had people come out and say, this happened to me, it's not right, we need to put a stop to this. And we've finally seen in 2015 the Royal Commission, people started talking about this. You've had all these people. There was Madeline West, Kate Miller-Heidke, Russell Manser, Terry Crews. A lot of famous people have come forward and said this happened to us as a child, and this is a real issue. I mean, there were stats from the Australian Maltreatment Study from, it was August 2023 or 2024. It was 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys will be sexually abused before their 18th birthday. And now you think, if there was 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys were speeding and killing people, how quickly would the government act to change laws about that? But you are twice as likely to be sexually abused as a child, as a girl, than you are to be a victim of domestic violence. And last year there was every state had millions of people doing protests and talking about it, even though you're twice as likely to be sexually abused. The second you mention sexual abuse, people switch off. They don't want to hear it. It's an uncomfortable topic. But guess what? We need to have uncomfortable conversations to make sure that these crimes are stamped out. I mean, it's not a problem you can arrest out of, but it's something we can definitely deter out of it.
Yeah. I'm a victim of sexual abuse. I was having a shower and a shave before I got on the podcast with you, and I was reflecting back. My father was sexually abusing my stepsister when I was 11 years of age. I didn't know that was happening, but in retrospect, the whole household was completely torn to pieces. My stepsister was being abused by my father. Was my mother's daughter. My mother was being violently, physically abused by my father. The whole house was this incredible festering cesspool of disgust. And my dad was a criminal, and he was respected gangster, and like in the old days, like, your old man's a good bloke, he's a good fighter, and he's a willing guy. And here he was molesting his stepdaughter, who had a child to him, and my mother pretended that she was pregnant to cover up the incest in the family, and everyone thought that it was my mother's child. I remember my mother putting a pillow up her dress for about 8-10 weeks, pretending she was at the last part of her pregnancy.
And that's the one thing people don't realize. 80% of all abuse is incestual. 92% is known by the victim survivor. And what happens when it's someone as part of the family unit? It's a lot of the time where the mothers aren't working, the male's the breadwinner. If they do anything to kick him out, then they're effectively homeless. Back in the days, it was one of those things, like we see it with churches, we see it with schools. Don't say anything, just pretend it never happened. And it was a cloak of, also it was like basically a veil of pretending back in the day. Just pretending it didn't happen. Schools back then were more worried about their reputation than child sex offender teachers. And we're slowly seeing the tide fall in favour of victim survivors, where children are believed now. 40 years ago, someone goes to the police station and said, my dad touched me. Cops would be like, absolutely not. We're not going to investigate that. We're now, right off the bat, there's family separation, there's child protection, there's police involved. But the hard thing is, a lot of police officers aren't actually trauma informed. And so when the father is abusing a child, in a room alone, they expect the child to sit in a room with a big scary police officer and talk about it. So it's only when my experience is it's 23.9 years the average time to report. And a lot of the contemporaneous reports that happen by children is not when they learn sex ed at school, which I think is year 5 or 6 from memory. It's when they learn about, in early years, now, this is your body, no one can touch you here. And then children go to their teacher, hang on, Uncle Bob's touching me there, and that's when the family get notified. But you think, like, you've known over the years, you've known people that have, gotten punched on at pubs and got arrested, or drunk drove and got arrested. I don't know anyone that would ever stand by someone that's been accused of sexually abusing a child.
No.
Like, I see it all the time. I see partners stand by, friends stand by. Like, there's no redeeming feature from someone like that. Like, in this day and age of cancel culture, you think if someone's been charged with sexually abusing a child, they should be hung out to dry. Like, no one should support that person.
From my experience of being in prisons, and I was in a lot of prisons over a lot of years, it was just not, there was no if, buts, or maybes. Like, it didn't matter who he was, didn't matter what status he came into, what crime he committed. If he was a child sex offender, he was going to be targeted by what we called the real crims. I don't know if it's the same these days. I hear
They're all in protective custody because I always thought that child sex offenders are actually targeted because of their crimes, but then I realised that it's not. They are targeted because a high percentage of people in prisons are victim survivors of child sexual abuse.
Yep.
And if they're locked in a space where a person who has been charged with a crime that effectively ruined their life, then they go after them. I mean, in South Australia, they're put in protective custody right away. They're protected. They're put in country clubs where they have their tea and biscuits, and the offenders tell them, here's all the loopholes. Here's how you hide your money. Here's, when you get out, here's a person at this address where she's a drug addict. If you give her $100, she'll leave you with her daughter for an hour. They're not separated, and this is how all the loopholes that I've been working on trying to change are going on. Because the second they're actually caught, I mean, the conviction rate is 0.003%. So every 1,000 reports, only 3 get convicted. And so the few that get convicted end up going to prison. They're told about all the loopholes, and then they hide their assets. Their victim survivors can't touch it, and they basically handball the buck over the taxpayer and say, hey, I'm going to get out of here in 10 years. I'm going to live off my $1 million super. These people can't touch me. They're not going to get a cent from me. Taxpayer can handle it. And guess what? I'm just going to keep living my life comfortably after I leave jail.
And the chances of reoffending are very high.
Yeah, and you say if people get arrested for images, for instance, you're never seeing people get charged with 1 or 2 images. You're seeing tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. There was a guy in South Australia a few weeks ago. He was done with 160,000 photos, and he was sentenced to 19 months in prison. Now, I did some quick maths on that. That worked out to 6 minutes prison per image. I put my kids in timeout for hitting each other longer than 6 minutes, and he's getting. I know the courts don't calculate it like that, but from a right-minded member of public, if you're doing divide the time by the images, you think, hang on, how is that justice?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And but there is no justice when it comes to sexual abuse.
No, there's no, for the victim survivors, it's a life sentence. There's no early release from their trauma for good behaviour. There's no home detention. They're dealt a life sentence. And when you see the rare instances where these offenders get prison time, it's not a life-ending sentence. Usually they're back out in 2 or 3 years. There's one guy he's a notorious teacher in South Australia. He got 10 years for abusing 2 children, but there's potentially hundreds he's abused. Like, I've sued this guy many times, and um, and one against him in the school. But what's happened is he's sitting in prison. He's got about $800,000 in superannuation. His victim survivors can't touch that because he sold all his assets, spent all his money. So in 10 years in prison, he's legally able to capitulate or get rid of all of his funds on newspapers and snacks and chocolate bars, all while his victim survivors get nothing. And I saw years ago that what people that were not charged, but you sue for child sexual abuse, what they'll do is they'll sell their assets, spend their money on legal fees, declare bankruptcy, their victim survivors get nothing, and they live comfortably off their superannuation. Now, back in 2020, I started a law change known as Super for Survivors, which says that if a person is sued for child sex offences, their superannuation should be up for grabs for either a settlement or a judgment sum. Because you think, how likely would you offend in a matter where you've got a 99.997% chance of getting off? Or if you go, right, there's a financial penalty here. If I offend, I lose everything I've worked for. My nest egg, my superannuation, which is protected, I can lose that. To me, that's the biggest deterrent. The reason why I'm not going 150 k's an hour to work in the morning texting on my phone is I don't care about the demerit points. I don't want a $2,000 fine.
Yeah.
And now I said I did a speech with Grace Tame in Lawn about a year ago, and the night before the speech, I was trying to think, how can I put a number on how can put a real life example of um, how unlikely it is for someone to get put in jail for this. And I said, to me, the most trusted news source to me in Australia is Sportsbet. Like, Sportsbet's never wrong. They
Yeah.
pick elections, they pick games. Uh, and I looked on the odds of something close to 99.997% odds of getting away with something. At that time, Pauline Hanson and Bob Catter were paying $101 to 1 to becoming the next Prime Minister of Australia. And if you think how unlikely that is to ever happen, the room then went, oh, wow. Like, it is so hard to get a conviction on child sex offending because you're dealing with people that, or I always use the best example, OJ Simpson. Everyone knew OJ Simpson did it. All the evidence pointed to him. His DNA was on the scene. He had a cut under his glove where his glove was. He was seen there. But the defense called a police officer back at the end who they had a tape recording of him making all these racial comments. And so he elected to remain silent. And they said, right, you've lied before, you're lying again. You could have planted this. And that got the reasonable doubt in the jury. So even though that he was guilty as sin on paper, they couldn't prove it beyond reasonable doubt that he was guilty. Then the family of Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman, I think his
Yeah.
name was, they sued him afterwards, and the court found that he was liable for their deaths. So if you cannot get a conviction, people think that's the end of the matter. But probably over 15 years, I think maybe 10 maximum of all claims that I've won have resulted in conviction. So people now are realizing how hard it is to get a conviction, and they're just going straight down the civil route, suing the offender, winning that way, because they're seeing, hang on, if I go through years of criminal trials and appeals and get cross-examined, I'm going to expose myself to this. The offender's going to sit in silence. What's in it for me? He'll get a year in prison at the end. What's happening to me? Where if you sue them, you take a large chunk of their assets, and that is the recognition that you get. Because most people give up food to afford medicine. Most people give up their own, putting money in the petrol in the car to buy their kids a birthday present. A lot of the people that have been abused as children never will work, never can work, won't finish school. And right now, this loophole is basically putting the taxpayer in the firing line of meeting the cost. Like, I don't know why the government doesn't want to implement this. Like, I've been meeting with politicians for years, and I've always said the only people against this super change would be the offenders themselves. But the government have turned around and said, oh, we're not going to touch superannuation, it's a protected asset. But then this year, the Albanese government, as part of the budget, they announced that $25 billion of revenue into Australian government came from the taxation of superannuation. So hang on, you're saying that you'd much rather tax hardworking Australians than go after the superannuation of child sex offenders. To me, if you know this loophole exists and you declare bankruptcy and you can live off your super for the rest of your life, you can go and rent a one-bedroom unit somewhere. You think if you're in your 70s and you've got $1 million in super, how comfortably could you live the rest of your life?
100%.
It's insane. And this loophole has been around for far too long. It all started with Peter Liddy, a former magistrate, that before he was sentenced, he got rid of all his assets and He was a millionaire. He's on the odd defined benefit scheme, which means if you're a government employee for 20 years before 1985, you retire on 80% of your wage. So technically, he's been sitting in a prison cell since 2000, earning 80% of a magistrate's wage, which I think current day is about 400 grand a year. And his victim survivors, all they got was a $10,000 victims of crime payment.
Yeah.
He'll get released from prison. He'll sit on an absolute gold mine. Why? Nothing is deterring these crimes. You look at ASIC, for instance. ASIC stopped prosecuting directors for breach of duties because they realise if they just offer a fine, people will stop doing that. So why wouldn't you throw everything you can at child protection and make sure that any avenues of offending are limited? Because if you're not going to go to prison, you're going to lose your life savings, and so you should.
What did, I'm a former ex-criminal, career criminal. I was born a criminal. I was born into a criminal family. When I got arrested, the first thing they did was seize all my assets. First thing, I was in the cells. They seized all my assets.
Yeah.
Proceeds of crimes. That's everything. They closed everything. I think hadn't even got to Grafton Jail. I hadn't even got to the cells to the jail. And that was for, importation of drugs, conspiracy. That was a conspiracy. It wasn't even an act committed.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they froze everything.
What you see now is you see any bikie or drug dealer arrested. The first thing to do is the police are parading their assets on the back of a tow truck, saying we've taken their M-Wagon, we've taken their Ferrari, their Harleys, their boats, and everything. But you see, say, a teacher is arrested for possessing child abuse material, and you see there's hundreds of thousands of images. Now you've got a teacher who 70, 80 grand a year as a new teacher. You've got them, and then all of a sudden you've got a picture of their house. They have a brand new BMW. They go overseas 5 times a year to these, Southeast Asian countries where they have their sex holidays. And you think, hang on, if they've got 100,000 images and they've got all their assets, why aren't you going straight off the bat and saying, hang on, you've got Bitcoin, you've got money for distributing these images. Why aren't you seeing their assets being taken away right away? What offenders are doing now, they're actually monetizing these images. They're trading it for Bitcoin, for drugs, for money, for cash, all this. But when you see these guys arrested, they're showing off. And like in South Australia, the government is more interested in 2 bikies being at a pub than they are with 100 pedophiles going to a Wiggles concert. Like it's insane. There was two bikies in Adelaide a few months ago where they were at a chicken shop. I think it was someone's funeral, and one was at a chicken shop, and the other guy walked in to order, and they said, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" The cops are watching them, went and arrested them both. Yet you've got all these abusers that are around. Like the South Australian government, it was until the 1st of July this year, 2025, that they finally said if you've been convicted of child sex offending, you cannot work at a place frequented by children. So if you were a convicted child sex offender, you could have worked at a boost juice at a beach where 14-year-olds are coming in day out in bathers. You could have been working there. It has yet to be outlawed, the AI programs that are creating deep fake images of children.
Yeah.
You think the law hasn't caught up with technology, but these are all basic no-brainer things where it's like, why wouldn't you close these loopholes? It's just insane that this isn't my job, it's not your job, it's the government's job. And I don't know any government that is succeeding with child protection. There's no national sex offender registers in.
Yeah.
There's no questions asked about a single guy going to the Philippines once a month for 2 or 3 days. There's nothing asked about that. There's nothing asked about or look at the childcare workers that they've had complaints about. They're not being investigated properly, and they're going on to offend many more times. Any other crime was happening to 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 5 boys, they would throw the book at it. But politicians don't see this as a vote getter because they just don't want to talk about it, because people hear about child abuse and turn the channel. I'm at fault myself. Like I've got 2 dogs, and if I watch a TV show where a dog's been harmed, I turn the channel right away.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. I do weekly videos on my Instagram page, and I start off every video saying, if you're a parent, grandparent, auntie and uncle, you need to watch this. And I detail the percentages each week of people in the District Court of South Australia who've been charged with child sex offences. But I started doing that in January 2024 because I realised, how can the public don't know how bad this is. And we're averaging about 25% a day of people in the District Court of South Australia who were charged with sexual offences against children. Like there was a day, I think it was last November, it was 53% of people in one day of all the court lists in District Court of South Australia were charged with the sexual abuse of a child. Yet the leading story on the news that night was a Green senator saying that they need to ban a McDonald's being built near a school because fast food's dangerous to children. I'm thinking, how is this not the lead story?
Yeah.
53% of all people in court charged with child sex abuse. That's every second person walking through court that day was a pedophile.
That's, when you start talking about those numbers, it's insane that it's not the headline, that it's not the major concern. We're all parents. The abuse that happened in my family was I'm 71, so it was 60 years ago. I'm still damaged today. I have a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old. I'm afraid to let my 10-year-old and 6-year-old go to other people's houses. I don't like my children being out of my sight. When I was a kid, you came home when the lights went on.
Yeah, street lights are about to come on, you get your ass home. But people don't realise that you look at a lot of drug use and alcohol use, it's all stems from child sexual offending. It stems from a traumatic event. It's all about numbing the pain. Like you don't see a happy kid just going, I'm just going to try meth today and be addicted to it. There's some underlying trauma that's caused by, and the heartbreaking thing is that they notify their parents for the first time when in their 30s and 40s they're abused as a child, and every time it happens, it's like a light goes off in the parent's head, and right off the bat, the parents go, "We remember it was term 2 of year 8 where you just simply changed over a weekend and something happened." And a lot of the time, it's say if it's a family member, you go to your uncle's house and something happens, and they say, "Look, don't tell your parents, otherwise we'll both go to jail or I'll harm your sister."
Yeah.
And then the child who has an uncle that's the favorite person in the world, they don't want to go there one weekend, and they decide, "I don't want to go." And the parents force them to go and keep forcing them to go there. And the parents, the red light goes off. Oh my God, like we should have listened. And that's the big thing. Listen to your children. If your child is obsessed with football and their whole bedroom is football, they love going to the football club, and they're 8 years old, they do all this one-on-one training with their coach, and all of a sudden one day they decide, I never want to go there ever again.
Exactly.
Instead of going, up, you love football, we paid for you to go there,
Yeah.
ask, why don't you want to go? You can tell us, you'll not be in trouble, you won't go to jail, nothing will happen to you.
Yeah.
Tell us exactly what's happened. You can trust us. I'd love to see more of that instead of, just go do that again. There's always a reason behind why a child has a change in behavior.
100%.
And if you see a child start using drugs and alcohol, what's the reason behind it?
Yep. Well, I'd never used a drug in my life. I went to boys' home in 1971. Got sexually abused by a prison officer. Came out of jail in 1973 as a heroin addict.
Because they
I was a
give
professional
heroin to they give heroin to make you comply with their requests or use it to numb the pain.
Yeah,
And then it goes to a vicious cycle. Then you need to commit crimes
Yeah.
to get that. And the amount of time that you see people that it's led them down the wrong path. And then you've got like there's teachers in schools in South Australia where schools knew that they were abusing kids for years and they did nothing about it. They just said, we'll keep an eye out, don't do it again. And you've got all these schools and institutions that are still more concerned about their reputation than adequately addressing child sexual abuse. There was a school in Adelaide that instead of the principal uncovered some documents showing historic abuse, and instead of going to the police with it, they hired a private investigator to go talk to all these students and say, "Oh, we found some stuff you're abused at a school by this teacher. Go to the redress scheme." And they're sending all these kids to the redress scheme because they get away with it. The redress scheme is an absolute last case resort. If you've got an institution that doesn't have insurance or is closed, you go to the redress scheme. But these schools that are sitting on, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars revenue per year, tax free, own the grounds, and they're trying to handball their liability onto the taxpayer.
Yep.
Like and I get attacked online all the time. It's not the current principal's fault this happened years ago. It's the school. It's the institution that's covered this abuse. The institution that's trying to do anything they can to save face, instead of going to old students and say, "Look, we acknowledge that one of these teachers ruined your life. Here's some money." They force these poor kids to go through the ringer of a law claim, and all these institutions have learned absolutely nothing since the Royal Commission.
What do you think? I have a issue with the redress scheme because I call it hush money. Like, here's 50 grand, get going, 100 grand, get going. But you're giving 50 grand to somebody who's never had $50. They've got a drug addiction, trauma, and they've got mental health issues or gambling addiction. So you just give them 100 grand, which goes straight to the dealer.
Yeah, and you've
I
got
have Real problem with
in
them.
the eastern states, you're seeing multi-million-dollar judgments in civil actions, and what these institutions and schools are doing, they're rubbing their hands together. When anyone speaks to the school about this, instead of suing us, just go through the redress scheme. You'll get money quicker, and people think, oh, great, 100 grand. I've never worked a day in my life. I'll get this, and it's gone in no time. Instead of, if you sue, there's actually going to be money protected for you to go and get treatment. You think if you 100 grand for someone that's a daily user is going to go within a week.
Yeah, yeah,
It'll be nose, arm, gambling, girls, hotel rooms. But when these institutions are finally held to account, if someone's a gambling addict, you get the public trustee involved. They're appointed, they handle their money. You get a private trustee where they can say, right, we're going to arrange for you. You're going to be in a 30-day inpatient clinic. We're going to get you clean and sober. And then after that, okay, well, here's a job. Here's money for a house. Actually set them up for life. The redress scheme ends in a year or two, and all that's going to happen is that it'll be the taxpayer meeting the cost of all this again. You think in South Australia, the third biggest landowner is the church,
100%. Yep.
and they have hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars revenue a year tax free. Yet
Yep.
they're not adequately compensating victim survivors. They're still burying documents. You never see a church come out and say, hey, we've just uncovered 100 complaints of this one priest from years ago. Look at George Pell. There's still complaints coming out about him now. They've settled claims to the church through the redress scheme about George Pell. Yet there's a college in New South Wales called Campion College that just named a library after him.
Yeah, I've
And
seen that.
you think the level of disconnect is your naming offend. And I did a post on that, and someone was trolling me and said he was never convicted of a crime. He was acquitted. Well, he was acquitted on a legal technicality. But you think how many decent, honest human beings, knowing what they know about George Pell, if he was still alive, who would trust him with babysitting their children? No one. He was covering up abuse. He was perpetrating. He was part
He,
of the most sinister
he was
child
a
sex
chess
offender in the country.
master.
Yeah.
He was the chess master. He was moving his pieces away to protect the Catholic Church.
There was in South Australia there was a school called St Ignatius, and they've got one in every state, I think. And they hired a retired judge to do a review into the handling of treatment. And so in 2017, 2018, the school has said, we had no knowledge of anyone ever abusing anyone, none. And then this judge got involved. In 2019, they did a report and released that the school had credible complaints. They shipped this guy to Sydney. His name was Brother Higgs. He continued to offend from 1971 to 1981. Then they shipped him to Melbourne, continued to offend from 1991 to 2001. And then he went to retire. He went to hand his resignation in because he finally got found out to being a perpetrator. And the school rejected his resignation because he'd been too good to them. And then a week later, he admitted again that he'd abused boys for 30 odd years, and they still didn't accept his resignation until 6 months later. And the school did this review, and they released the findings on Christmas Eve 2019,
Yeah,
knowing that it would be published in the paper the next day. I don't know anyone that would ever read a newspaper on Christmas Day.
100%.
And so it's again, let's just try and downgrade everything. We're just going to keep it hush hush. Nothing's come out about that. The school had knowledge. The school knew he was doing it. He admitted it, but that was enough for them to accept his resignation. And this was 2001. Like, this wasn't in the 60s.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's still happening today.
It is. And the church and the schools, their main obligation is to cover up the abuse. They want to make sure they save face. They're forcing people to sign non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality agreements, even when there's direct evidence showing hiding of abuse and shuffling around. They're still not making admissions of it. I tell people that the redress scheme is the absolute last case um, resort. Like, if there's no insurance, if there's no more institution, go through that. Schools, churches, institutions have millions, if not billions of dollars you can go after. So do that. And the redress scheme is going to end, and people are going to realize that, oh, hang on, all these judgments are coming out. People are suing for multi-million dollars, and I've settled my claim for 50 grand.
Yeah.
And they're trying to push people to settle as quickly as possible. And the redress scheme was set up on the basis that this is going to be a lot quicker than going to court, and the redress scheme's blown out. It's under resourced, and people are realizing that sometimes going to court is a lot quicker than the redress scheme, and they're getting money. There was a case example of two brothers in New South Wales. Both were at the same institution, same form of abuse. One brother got 50,000 under the redress scheme. The other one got almost $1 million at trial.
Why do you think, better question, how are we going to make it enough noise to get some oil on the squeaky wheel to get the government to change? How do we go about it? Because, I started a company called Beyond Lighthouse because Russell and I were going to go into business in New Zealand. I went to New Zealand, sat through the whole Royal Commission into abuse in care with David Abita, and we were going to start a company. And then Russ passed away, and I kept on going with the company, and I disassociated from anything that was related to Russell's companies and started my own company with my wife because we want to do the back end stuff, the stuff you talked about. We have financial advisors. I'm a drug and alcohol counsellor. That's what I've done for the last 40 years,
Yeah.
drug and alcohol rehabilitation. That's how I met Russell, trying to help him to deal with his addiction. And we realised that so many people that I was treating for drug addiction were victims of sexual abuse. So we start to correlate the relationship. Well, then it brought me to come out and say, well, I'm part of that system.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I've always said, like, I've had people offer donations to me and all that. I said, I don't, like, my thing is I don't need money. Like, my
Yeah.
change isn't about money. My change is about using a platform to speak up. Like, if there's a case that came out in a day, I'll do a video on that and get a couple 100,000 views. And I'm simply saying my role is to have these uncomfortable conversations, talk to people, actually make this a Monday thing. Like you look, for instance, I always use the example. There was in the 2001 MTV Movie Awards, it was hosted by Chris Rock. And I vividly remember it. He said R. Kelly is sitting in the front row, which means you have to move the Olsen twins all the way down the back. You think since the 80s, there's been might have been earlier than that, a talk about Michael Jackson being a predator.
Yeah.
And, people still celebrated him.
Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah, it was always seen about Michael Jackson, oh, it's a joke, he's a creep, let's laugh about him being a creep. But, no one ever spoke about that. And when it started coming out that, he was a monster, people then go, oh, no, I don't want to hear it. He's great at music. And my big thing is, I want to be the voice of the voiceless. Like people ask why I'm so passionate. I was never sexually abused as a child. It's never happened to me. I've just been doing this area of law for that long that I see how the injustice is, how people are, pushed aside. And I thought, we need to have these discussions about this. If we're not having active discussions and passive discussions about this form of area, nothing's going to change. If we're not saying, one big thing is I always see these articles and I share them, and then people say judges are useless, magistrates are useless. The judges and magistrates, they can only enforce the law. If the government says, this person gets a minimum sentence of, 3 months jail, that's all they can offend. If the government's going to start doing things about, you've got 10 images, that's 6 months jail. You've got 100,000 images, that's minimum 10 years. Things like that. That's when it changes. But to me, I just want to talk and highlight this is an article that's unfair. Here's a story that's unfair. Here's an abuser that got a rough sentence. Let's talk about this. Let's see why it's happening. Or, the government hasn't implemented a child sex offender registry yet. Why? Well, here's the reasons for and against. My big thing is that I'm going to keep having these uncomfortable conversations to try and get some change out of it. If my law change, if I started in 2020, if it was done and dusted within 6 months, I would have been happy with that. I would have been a footnote in some parliamentary document, and that's it. I would have been back at work.
Yep.
The fact that I keep pushing this change and I keep getting attention out of it means that there's a lot of people out there that want that. If you put this to a vote, it would only be the child sex offenders that wouldn't want it.
Yeah.
I don't see any person in Australia except a child sex offender if they'll put to it, well, wouldn't it be good if all the offenders lose their money? Absolutely. They shouldn't be keeping the nest egg. If all their victim survivors are in housing trusts and
Yeah.
they're in a $1 million mansion on the beach, hang on, why?
Yeah. I was in Townsville last week and I met up with a lady called Kathleen Walsh. I don't know if you know Kathleen. She's lovely. She wants to meet you. She owns a company called Crack On and she helps people with sexual abuse and she helps survivors and she takes them to court. She picks them up. She sits with them beside them in court and she's just such a beautiful woman. And she'd been abused, and she doesn't mind me talking about this. She'd been abused as a child herself by a priest and, she really is an advocate for helping people, and she said to me, well, what are we going to do? How can we all get together? We need to get stronger because And I've always said it my whole life, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. We have to make enough noise so that we become unbearable, so that people have to start going, okay, there's a noise. How do we shut this noise up? Because they don't want to fix the problem. They want to shut the noise up.
Yeah.
By shutting the noise up is by fixing the problem. What's the problem? Well, the predator still gets his cake and eats it too.
Yeah. And the conviction rate is that appalling. And you look at one of the main reasons why people don't want to go to trial is look at the Brittany Higgins case, for instance.
Yeah.
People said it's the Brittany Higgins trial. No, it was the trial of Bruce Lerman. She had her entire life turned upside down. And one of the pillars of the criminal justice system is they have the right to silence. But when you start suing these offenders, they have to take an active role. They have to defend it. And the amount of offenders that shit the bed on the stand, that are not credible witnesses, that are disbelieved, and it's rarely ever that there's a single offence against a child. It's say with a teacher, it's they offend when they first start, they get away, they keep going and going and going, and it turns into the worst offences known to man because they just don't get caught.
Yeah.
And they realise that this guy that I abused 20 years ago is now a raging drug addict, so that person goes to the police, well, they're not going to be believed.
Yeah.
But if you sue them, the offender then has to take the stand as well, and you start cross-examining them, and you start realising that this is a part of an ongoing pattern of abuse they've had for years. That's when they stop doing it. Because right now, what's the risk? If you had a crime that you're 99.997% likely to get away with, what's a deterrent?
Yeah.
But then I've never lost against an offender in court suing him. Never. I don't plan on doing it ever. And you think when they stare down the barrel of, well, I'm going to get away with doing this crime, but I've worked really hard for the past 50 years. I've got 2 investment properties and $1 million in superannuation. Oh, I'm going to lose that. The lower socioeconomical areas where there's people that don't have houses, if they don't have a house, if they've worked since 1987, they have super.
Yeah.
And so at least there's a way to take that. And the only competent argument I've ever heard against this would be, but the taxpayer is going to have to meet the cost of an old age pension of these offenders. I said, well, that's fine, but you realise we're currently meeting the cost of victim survivors from 18 for life. Now,
which is massive.
Which is 67 to life. I think the national average life expectancy is about 82 years. So what are we doing? Carry an old child sex offender for 15 years, or a victim survivor for 64 years.
Yep.
And this isn't a sexual offender on the pension is just what, housing assistant and food. Where victim survivors, you are meeting the cost of weekly GP sessions, weekly psychiatric sessions, pharmaceutical benefit scheme, rent assistance, carers, all things like that. Because I've had people that are too scared to leave the house. I've had people that have never worked in their life. I've had people that constantly go hungry to because they can't afford basic living. Whilst there was an offender here in Adelaide, he owned a freehold house right on the beach, had millions of dollars in super, and he was found guilty. His abuse was actually done in public as well as private, so there was a bunch of people that caught him. And when we went to sue him, his position was, I'd rather give a barrister $20,000 a day than give that girl a cent because she ruined my life. He's like, I'd rather sell my house and live off my super. And he was blaming this 12-year-old for ruining his life when he was sexually abusing her for a year.
Yeah.
And that's the level of disconnect these people have. Yet, if they can't hide behind their super, it's like, well, we'll go for it. Or even one thing, Barry Cable, the AFL player, he declared bankruptcy the night before his trial. Maurice Van Vryn in New South Wales, he declared bankruptcy after there was a judgment against him. Now, that debt will be wiped by the bankruptcy. But if they defrauded someone, say if they stole $1 million, declared bankruptcy, and in 10 years from now, they have a house. Debts in fraud don't die in bankruptcy, so you can have another crack at them. One thing I'm asking the government as well is if someone declares bankruptcy, that's not going to extinguish this debt. They then have to repay it because this isn't a business that went bad. This is a constant of someone to groom a child, sexually abuse them, ruin their life, and pass their crimes onto the taxpayer.
But what I don't understand, Andrew, is this, if you're a drug smuggler and you're still ruining people's lives, I don't justify for 1 second. There is no difference between the drug smuggler's proceeds of crime and a sex offender's proceeds of crime. Still a crime. His proceeds are irrelevant because even if you get charged with conspiracy, they take all your assets. It's not crime hasn't even been followed through.
If you're receiving money for sexually abusing a child, then I don't know why that your assets aren't automatically just taken.
Yeah.
But then it's the victim survivors are going to put their hands up and say, "Oh, hang on, we want that." But what we're seeing now, and what we especially saw during COVID, is these sickos couldn't go on their sex holidays, so they would pay someone $5 over Skype to abuse a child and tell them exactly what they want to do to them, and that's how they got their kicks. But then what happens is, and I always use the example, when you're a child, you get a football for Christmas, and you keep playing the football, then you want to go kick it at the park. And then eventually you want to go and actually play a game. What these offenders do, they start with pictures, then they go to images, and then they start going to children. You know, why wouldn't you cut the source off right away? Start coming down hard on these people. If you throw everything you could at this crime, you watch how quickly people go, well, hang on, I don't want to lose all my assets. I'm going to lose my family's business. I'm going to lose, my children's inheritance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Stop offending. That's the point. Yeah, the sex offender registry is the Liberal government's for it. The Labor and Greens are against it. But one of the reasons why the Greens are against it is it's going to promote vigilante behaviour. Now, if someone abused my children, I'd be the first one that would go and harm them. It's not going to be a member of the public seeing someone on TV. Now, how often do you hear on the news a father's been arrested for, assaulting or killing a person that's offended the child? Never. I haven't in all my years of doing this, I've had two examples where it happened. One where there was a mother leaving court and the offender was in front of her, and the news cameras were following the offender, and the offender was probably 6'3", 160 kilos, morbidly obese. The
Yeah.
mother's not even 5 foot tall, probably 50 kilos. The mother's walking, punching this guy. Well, it didn't hurt him. And there was another one that happened a few months ago. It was on the news where a guy found his offender was living close to him and went and broke his jaw.
Yeah.
Now, they're the two times in South Australia that I've heard anything about vigilante behaviour that's resulting in harm in 15 years.
Yeah.
Now, to me, that argument is completely redundant.
Yeah. In America, there was a case where the guy actually shot the perpetrator.
Oh, the Alaskan,
And he was handcuffed to the cops, and he just shot the guy in the hand, put the gun on the table, and
no, yeah, that was in 1970s.
Yeah.
Robert,
and he never got
Roulet. Yeah, was it a phone? So his offender was walking through an airport.
Yep.
And Roulet, I think, walking through an airport, and he's waiting with a gun and just shot him. I mean, there was one in Russia where I shouldn't laugh, but it's kind of in Russia, a guy's best friend sexually abused his daughter, so he went to his house, stabbed him 45 times in the back, dug a hole, buried him. And then it went to a Russian judge, and they ruled it a suicide. They said, we find that this guy dug his own hole, stabbed himself 45 times in the back, and the whole. And you see stories like that, and you think, well, that's justice. In Australia, it doesn't work that way. In Australia, we're seeing, it's the legal system, not the justice system. Constantly seeing victim survivors completely disheartened about someone getting a year in prison for years of abuse. It's nothing is ever going to restore this, but at least if we start cleaning out the accounts of offenders and give it to survivors, we might actually see these crimes minimise. And that's all we can ask for. Like, if it stops one person from offending, then it's worth it.
But what you say is what I love, and that's why I asked you to come on the show, because we have to talk about this. We have to have this conversation. It has to become public information. It's not a secret society. We have to become public information that education needs to be given to the police, the system, that it's not okay. When I was a child, my father used to abuse my mother. The cops would come around and say, keep the noise down. Keep the noise. My mum was 5 foot. My father was 6 foot. My father would beat her and break her ribs and her jaw and her nose, and the cops say, just keep the noise down.
Yeah.
60 years later, not much has really changed.
No, we're still seeing women getting murdered because police aren't providing intervention orders, or they're not, there's no mandatory reporting with certain things, or the police go to their house and the monster stand next to the mother and said, go home. It's a thing. Look at domestic violence, for instance. Like, why do we need women's shelters? Why should women and children have to flee their house? If a man is assaulting a child, the man needs to leave the house, not the women and children. Yeah. And one of the main reasons that women and children don't leave is because they don't have the financial resources to actually go, because the male's the breadwinner.
Yep.
You think if the government's spending millions and millions of dollars a year on self-contained units for women and children to move into, why wouldn't you just say, hang on, we'll just have a facility that has bedroom, bathroom, and make the abusers go in there?
Yeah. And also make the punishment worthwhile.
Oh, the amount of times I see, well, there was a guy that I'm suing at the moment, he abused his sister as a child and then didn't get any prison time. We've seen people abuse children around the country, and like look at the Collingwood cheer squad leader Joffa. He pled guilty to raping a 16-year-old, didn't get any prison time. And you think how? Like, why would someone come forward and report this and spend months with police recounting the most horrendous abuse they've ever endured, to sit through a trial, get cross-examined, get not believed, guy gets convicted, and then gets 12 months home detention? Anyone that lived during COVID was home detention. You stay at home, you only leave to go to the grocery shops, see the doctor. That's home detention. You can sit and watch movies all day. You can have your mates come over. You can do all kinds of stuff. You can get exercise passes. How is that justice?
Yeah. Even little Mel, Mel, she was a prison officer and she repulsed us so much that the way that the pedophiles were being treated that she resigned from the job.
Yeah, and all they do is they have their tea and biscuits and they trade war stories. And you watch, if offenders are actually put through general pop, look how quickly they change, because they get arrested. They've got no fear. I'll go to Mount Gambier or Port Lincoln. I'll be in a country club and I'll have tea and biscuits all day, and I'll get to play in the yard and work out. It's a country club for these guys, and nothing's changing. It's what's 12 months in a centre like that
When I
going to
was
do?
in jail as a young fella, there was hardly any protection, and there wasn't that many sex offenders, because when they did come, they actually got what I believe they deserved. Even though I shouldn't say, violence is the answer to anything. Abusing a child, a harmless child.
Well, it's not the answer, but if someone goes, right, if I do go to jail, I'm going to be put in general pop and lose all my money, the fear of actually potentially being harmed might be enough to stop them from harming someone.
But they've
But
made
again,
special jails for them.
yeah,
They've made special jails just for pedophiles.
yeah.
And you know what happens when a bunch of drug dealers or a bunch of armed robbers or a bunch of safe crackers get together? We talk about how we're going to break into the next safe, or how we're going to do the next bank robbery, or how we're going to do the next drug smuggling.
Yep.
We compare notes and work out how we're going to do it next time to get away with it. What, you telling me that pedophiles aren't doing the same?
That's all. I've heard stories where they talk about a drug addict in a certain area that has young children, that they can go and abuse them. They talk about how they can hide their assets. They talk about certain villages overseas where you can go and not get caught. Certain webs, it's sickening. We're not seeing it slow down. Like, you're still seeing people get arrested with 500,000 images. You're seeing guys in childcare centres charged with abusing or making 2,000 children go and get STD checks.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't something that's slowing down.
Yeah. That was crazy. And
But no,
he's been,
I really appreciate you using your platform to actually try to get
yeah.
this message across, because I want to make sure that this, Australia's never going to have the death penalty, but at least it's going to be a chance where you're going to lose everything, and you're going to have to explain to your family why you've lost all your assets. And the simple reason is, don't do this, don't harm children. It's simple as that.
I'm, as I said to you, mate, my wife was the driving force behind Beyond Lighthouse, because she recognised in me that a lot of my damage was through my childhood and through my sexual abuse, and even through the abuse being in the house before it even started happening to me. Before it happened to me, I was already damaged just by being in that same area that the sexual abuse was happening. I wrote a book all about my life story, and wrote about. People think I wrote the book about my life story. I wrote the book about my father being a child molester. My sister was 7 years older than me, my older sister. She's 77 now, 78. And I asked her for permission, and she said, please write it. Because she wanted me to put that out in the story. And then she didn't tell my younger sister, who's now 60 years of age, she didn't know until she was 35 that her sister was really her mother. Now, it's horrible.
Yeah, and I'm assuming there was no police involvement with your dad. He was never arrested, never charged with it, and
Never held
people
responsible.
would have said when he passed away, "Oh, what a great guy he was."
And that's exactly what happened. But what happened before he passed, I put my eldest sister and my youngest sister in one of my homes for 2 weeks and said to my eldest sister, tell her the truth. Don't let him die getting away with this. I wanted my youngest sister to know who her father was, and this is long before I understood anything about what we do today. But in my heart of hearts, I was always a good person doing bad things. I wasn't a bad person. I was just brought up on the wrong side of the law,
Yeah.
and my upbringing and my teachings were wrong, were completely wrong. But I knew even those days, shooting somebody was not as bad a crime as touching somebody.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that people, especially in prisons, think if they're going to talk about this, they're being a rat. Russ always said,
Yeah.
speaking about child abuse, that's not a rat.
No.
That's ratting is, you know, speaking to your friends. This is someone that if you've ever been abused as a child, you know that if you come forward and stop this person, you wouldn't wish that harm on anyone. And speaking up is going to save another child from being harmed, and that's when people need to come forward. So,
We have to do it. We have to stop. I believe that we've got an obligation
of
as
course, we do.
human beings, as men, to protect our children. I really do. I think we have an obligation. And I don't think that there's any justification whatsoever that
None.
we can say it's okay. He was harmed. Hurt people. I was hurt. I've
Yeah.
never molested anybody. I won't cop that shit.
Well, that's all my platform is about, is just making sure that we just have these uncomfortable conversations and raise it. I do videos every week, and I just tell people to share them. The more people that hears about the stats and hears about the unjust nature of these crimes, the more people talking about this, is we're going to see change.
We
So
have,
that's all I can ask for.
we have to do the superannuation. I really want to get behind you and support you. And everybody I talk to over the next XYZ, I'm going to say, come on, let's start a movement. Let's start making a lot of noise so that we can be part of making the change. We can't change the world, but we can change ourselves. And I've learned to change myself. And if I can change, other people can change, and we can actually carry a message as a human being. I don't want my grandchildren's grandchildren to be talking about pedophilia.
Same. The second you have children, that's when it puts everything in perspective. I realise that if it's 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys being abused, I think, well, with my children in school, I'm like, right, well, I can't eliminate it, but imagine in 10 years' time, it's with part of the super change. Now it's 1 in 8 girls and 1 in 10 boys.
Yeah.
Like, we can never get rid of this from happening, but at least we can try to minimise it. So, but I really appreciate you having me on, and thanks for the support and all you do. And we'll just keep trying to make Australia a dangerous place for offenders.
Andrew Carpenter,
Appreciate you,
thank
mate.
you very much for coming on The Truth About Addiction, mate. You're a gentleman. You really are. You're a good human being, mate, and I really appreciate your
I
time.
solemnly
Thank you.
swear that I will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.